Welcome to the Driven to Succeed Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Olson. And today I have a guest, Mike Mitchell from Mitchell Realty, right in Robbinsdale. And Mike, it's an honor to have you on. We became friends over the last, 3 years now, because that's when I bought my house, is
Yeah,
May of 2020, and you were the listing agent on it.
that's right. Yes. Yes.
I used my mother to as my agent,
Yes.
and you lived right down the street.
Yes. Yeah. So interesting story, fun beginning. And yeah, ever since then we've remained friends and yeah,
Yeah.
many more deals together.
Right, and that was the best part because obviously, I was like, well, he lives right down the street. After I closed, it was like I think it was just a couple of weeks. You came to get your signs, and we started talking, and that's
Yeah,
where the relationship kind of started. So it was
absolutely. And now you've helped a lot of our buyers get financing and
yeah, that's the goal. Obviously, you never know who you're going to come across, number one, but
right.
yeah, it's been fantastic working with you,
Yeah.
Derek, Liz. I've talked to Brad and Dylan both before. It is
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
So Derek and I have done quite a few transactions now.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a great team.
Yes.
You've done a lot of marketing around Robbinsdale and
Yes.
yeah,
I just moved out of Robbinsdale last year. We moved to Maple Grove, but my 5-year-old daughter goes to Sacred Heart, and our office is in downtown Robbinsdale. So we like the quaint vibe, and we like it. So we are trying to market there and do business there.
yeah. I mean, it's pretty. I mean, obviously, I'm newer to the area yet. Even it seems like, but I'll stop in some places and I'll see your information there, or I'll get flyers and
Yeah.
stuff in the mail, and it's got your stuff all over it. So it's been pretty nice to see that.
Yeah, I like to support, the hyper local, so to speak, thing. So we have an ad in our church bulletin, small little things. We've got an ad at Cub Foods. We got an ad in the Sun Post. We've got a bus bench. We've got some digital stuff.
Right.
And we a couple years ago we wrapped the Zamboni at the Armstrong Ice Arena, I believe it is, in New Hope. And so we get a lot of hockey dads sending us pictures and videos
That's
and
awesome.
posting to Facebook, and our other agent friends will post and
Now,
you know m-
in this business, just building that community,
yeah,
being part of that community goes such a long ways. I mean, and I know you're a grinder, dude. Like what you called me the other night at 8:30 and you were just in your basement calling people, right? And it's this in this
yeah,
business, this time of year, in this market, and you're still doing, I think you're doing a little more commercial right now than
yeah,
you are actually doing on the actual residential side. But
yeah, we're still doing we're staying busy with residential.
yep.
It's tougher for sure. Rates are high. I'm sure everyone's saying the same thing, but everything, what's going on is very similar to this book I listened to, Shift by Gary Keller. It was like he wrote it, I don't know, yesterday, but it was written many years ago. And everything's harder and it's tougher, and you've got to stick in there and have patience. And the deals are harder to get closed. We're doing apartment deals and office building and retail, and it's tough trying to get the numbers to work so that the banker will lend you money. Where you've got now, besides the rates, you have insurance. One of the big things that keeps coming up on a lot of these commercial deals is you give the new prospective buyer all your expenses, and you say, hey, my insurance is this per month, this annually, and they use that number and they go and get quotes, and it's double.
Double. Yeah.
And so we are seeing that, and we're seeing it like in apartments. We're doing some deals in St. Paul, and it's almost as though the insurance companies are trying to figure out a way to not insure these properties. Well, we can't insure this. There's a grill left outside, or there's too much moss on the roof, or things
Yeah.
like that. So it's kind of a cautious environment. It's tricky.
Well, that insurance, not to go down a rabbit hole of insurance right now, but I mean, premiums across the board have like increased by 30%. I've got a couple brokers I work with, and they're just literally talking about how insurance companies like Badger out of Wisconsin, they're just trying to pull everything out. and
Sure.
they did like they doubled my my policy this year, and I was like, for what? I
Yeah.
didn't have a claim or anything, and so I ended up going, and the broker's like, yeah, they're doubling the policies, and if you cancel with them, they don't care. They just
Yeah,
want their money.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's we're not quite like Florida. Florida has a real problem with insurance
Sure.
because of the hurricanes, but the cost of everything has gone up so much, and that's part of the reason. Is like, okay, well, we're insuring these homes where policy is 1600 $1700, and then you know a roof used to cost 20 grand or maybe 15 grand. Now it's 25 grand,
Yeah.
right? And so it's a different ball game. Anyway, regardless, let's not talk about that as
Yeah.
much,
And
but
and all the fun hail claims. We've got a bunch of commercial properties and residential properties and clients' properties who were in the midst of helping them buy or helping them sell, and now it's the insurance claim effect. Now we've got to mitigate all these claims and try to educate some people who maybe have never sold a home on a claim
right,
while it's going on, and
right.
sometimes you're dealing with other agents and even sellers, buyers who don't understand it and exceeds their bandwidth, and it's
It's
more of a emotional reaction rather than like understanding it. And so unfortunately or luckily, I've been through quite a few. We When we did your house, there was an insurance claim, and it's how to make sure that everything is taken care of, and you've got to make sure that your buyer is comfortable and make
right.
sure you've got the correct documentation, and it's all kinds of different
The
facets.
all Yeah, exactly. And that's what, I've gotten to be over the years. My first couple of years, I didn't know how to explain that stuff to a client,
Yeah.
right? So you learn the hard way
Yeah.
sometimes, but being able to educate the client and keep like, here's the process, and
Yeah.
just walk them through that process, and keep that emotion out of it
Yeah.
more as a business transaction, and the seller isn't trying to screw you, and
Yeah.
and anything
Yeah.
else that comes up, right?
And then being able to convey it in a way where myself, tend to think I move pretty quick. I've
Hmm.
done hundreds of deals, I've owned hundreds of properties, and I move quick, and nothing concerns me too greatly. That and I have someone who's a seller, and this is the first home that they've ever sold, and it's a very emotional experience. We
Right.
were Right now, we're in the process. We sent a letter, cold called, bought a triplex where the gentleman has lived there, I don't know, 40 years. He's living throughout three of the units,
Wow.
and he doesn't have the financial wherewithal to go and buy without selling this. So
Sure.
we went out and met him and came up with an offer. And so we're going to buy his property as is cash. And then he was able to go out and write a cash offer on a condo. And so I've got one of my agents helping him with that. And he is very emotional. And I was
Mhm.
in there with my contractors and trying to figure out a plan of what we're going to do. We're going to be closing in a week or so. And I could tell he was getting a little emotional. And
Sure.
so I had to dial it back a little bit and make sure that, we were good. It's
Right. Well, see, when you can pick up on that, and
yeah,
or and how to handle that situation,
yeah,
it leads me into you got started years ago, and you more or less were flipping homes to begin with, right? Is that
yeah,
correct?
yeah,
Right? And you've flipped well over 100 homes.
yeah. I think I've probably got like 160 plus, and we've bought in duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes and apartment buildings and lots of different commercial buildings. And so I started out and started working for a brother-in-law, and he owned a bunch of office buildings, and kind of dropped out of college and started helping him do maintenance and management, and then later into leasing. And then I think I bought my first house in like 2005 or so. I bought a duplex, and on stated income. I couldn't afford to buy it, but
Right.
I knew the numbers and I knew how it could work. And so I bought a duplex, and I lived in there with two of my high school buddies, and that helped. And bought the duplex, then I started flipping homes and I started working on my own homes because I couldn't afford to hire anyone, probably the first 5,
Right.
and then got rolling. It was in the downturn, and I think I bought my first flip house in like 2010. And so then I think at one point maybe we were able to do like 10 or 12 a year. And we were buying these homes and then snowballing into buying duplexes and triplexes. And then what I've done is I've tried to exchange a lot of my real estate that's longer term held into commercial, because I feel as commercial is a little less emotionally charged and it's more
Right.
entrepreneur, and
The numbers got to work in the
yeah,
commercial side.
and it's, we own some apartment buildings and single family homes, and it's a different dealing. It's someone's home, whereas, it's emotionally charged.
Right.
So
Yeah, I mean that just goes to all of our listeners out there or followers that like if you want to talk to an expert about flipping and buying, and that this is your guy right here.
yeah,
So, because you've had, the experience across the board from, I mean, that just says it all. Like you were on the leasing side to begin with, then
yeah,
you're like literally doing all the work,
yeah,
and then you got to a point where you were hiring out,
yeah,
got contractors, and I know you've even introduced me to a couple of them,
yeah,
and over the years and so forth to get them into their houses.
yeah.
So I mean that experience goes a long ways.
Yeah, I think it's like what it is I look at it as it's the evolution of an investor. Whereas when you start out, most of the time you don't have any capital. I'm borrowing from family members and I'm buying these homes that are foreclosed. I started befriending all these agents and saying, hey, I've got the ability to buy these and I'll give you both sides. And I would chase the deal, not the commission. I would work with agents, but I would also be actively looking myself. And so then I started working with different agents and they would sell my flip homes. And then I said, hey, I think I could do a better job with them. So then them. And so I became the real estate agent and got my license. And then I was working on many homes that, I didn't homestead. And so would have to have like a general contractor. And most of the time, a friend of mine had a license. And so I got my license and I've held a general contractor's license for, I don't know, 20 years.
Right.
And I still hold it to this day so that, I have all these investment properties. And if there's some sort of insurance claim or something, I can act as the general contractor and I can hire all the people. I don't necessarily have to get in there and do the work, but it can help me stay in control and I'm
Of
not
this
dependent
the
upon
expense.
somebody
Yeah.
else.
Right.
And then, over the years, I've got, a huge toolbox of owner operator contractors, heating vendors, plumbers, electrician, all these guys who are tried and trusted, and we kind of use them. And so it's the evolution. It's you have to make cash. So where do you make cash? You flip homes, you wholesale homes, you borrow other people's money. And then I think a lot of people maybe get into trouble because they're buying rentals too quickly before they have enough cash. And they think, oh my gosh, the agent said it cash flows. Well, it makes $400 a month, but then a tenant moves out and you spend, you know, $8,000 renovating the unit. So then you're making zero, but
Right.
you're getting depreciation. You're hopefully getting appreciation. I mean, it's a great buy, but I think people don't understand that of the concept of, hey, I have 20 duplexes or I have 20 houses. That's great. I think it's noble. It's awesome. It's not the route. I wanted to flip homes, get cash, buy rental properties, fix up stabilize these rentals, these duplexes, these fourplexes, and then trade them off, into larger assets and do exchanges. And I think in, residential, 4 units and under, there's a lot of people who may have really great jobs and other sorts of income who need to invest in real estate for tax purposes, these things. And, they will pay way more than I'll ever pay because I do this and I need to
Right.
feed my family. I need to live off this. I don't have another job. I don't
Right.
have
Right.
and so I think that is how a lot of these guys, you talk to a lot of these guys who own commercial buildings, and I have many friends, and they all started flipping houses and, rolling it. But you've got to be able to sell, and some people can't sell anything. They just are maybe too scared, or the taxes, or all these other factors.
Right, right.
So,
Well, it sounds like you knew once you got going, you understood how to actually scale that business, and because yeah, it's a lot. Okay, you sell a couple houses, all of a sudden you got capital gains taxes
yeah,
on these, and you got to save that, and again, you knew how to leverage other
yeah,
people's money
yeah,
until it became your money, right?
yeah,
And then now you've got to the point where you're buying some big buildings, right?
yeah.
So
We're trying. I think that there's a sweet spot. Like myself, I don't syndicate deals. I don't have partners. I've got a high school friend. We own an apartment building and some houses on Nicollet and a duplex, and all the other stuff I own myself. And
yeah,
there's so many guys who have syndications and partners, and I think that's great. But I guess back to scale. I guess I'm not good at scaling because I enjoy doing it myself. Maybe
sure,
I'm stubborn. I want to have all my skin in there, and I'm
right,
lucky enough to do all right where I'm not dependent on this so much where I have to go get these partners. And so I like to do the deals on my own. And I think a lot of realtors, they don't understand, there's so many of these realtors I see on social media that look like they're just doing a ton of deals. And like, if you actively manage your real estate that you own, you can be designated as, a real estate professional in your tax returns. And then you've got all these other doors that are open now for depreciation. And
right,
let's say you're a lucky enough realtor where you are making $500,000 in gross commission, and you can only buy so many sponsored Facebook ads, you can only do so many billboards and
right,
things like that. And with commercial real estate or even residential, these things, there's all these avenues of cost segregation and depleting so much of that tax liability that is incurred from just commissions, because I would
right,
say most of these people are paying 45%.
right.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's various reasons. That's not the only reason why we're doing it, but there's a lot of benefits. I
Right.
know agents who are far busier than I who have to buy one or two buildings a year because they have such high tax liability from their commissions, where they can buy these buildings and
Sure.
get rid of some of
And,
that.
and and being able to do that on your own without the partners, because I mean, let's face it, how many times have I heard the stories of, oh, we got in, this partnership with like three or four people. Well,
Yeah.
then it just becomes a mess. So, it's great.
Yeah.
A couple years goes into it, and all of a sudden something happens. Somebody does something,
Yeah.
next thing you know, you got a mess on your hand with a bunch of properties that you
Right.
own, right, in a partnership.
Yeah. And it's just, it's like with real estate, I say it's like the three P's: the purchase agreement, the property, the people. And the people is always the hardest. You can be
Hmm.
great at the property, figuring out what's wrong, the numbers, how it cash flows, the NOI, all these things. But the people's the wild card because they all have emotion. And that's like, I have no issue with partners, but I just, I,
A lot easier to do it by yourself
yeah,
at this point, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And that's why you're here. That's why the expertise that you have, and just from people that want to use you as a real estate agent, use your team,
Yeah,
or we were talking on the phone the other day, and you were talking about like how you connected with so and so and so and so, and then all of a sudden you had all these properties that you could just purchase all at once.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. We do a lot of cold calling. We could always do more, but
Mhm.
I think that in today's era of 7% interest rates, there used to be these people who were buyers who were incentivized to buy by lower rates. Maybe a family member, dad, mom, says, hey, you got to get out of your apartment, rates are at 3.5, this is a great opportunity. And I think that crowd, is diminished. There's still people who have planned for years to move and are gonna move. They're going to make enough money and they're going to buy regardless. But,
Right.
the incentive to buy group, I think, has diminished. And so I've said this to my agents and my team and my friends, you've got to go find the people who are going to sell. So who are going to sell? People who are getting divorced, people who are dying, people who have bad, ugly houses, people who have different issues,
Right.
job transfers, and there's, there's signs you can figure out how to chase these leads. And with me, I'm not that good on social media. I don't have a ton of, pay-per-click ads or doing SEO. We just have systems where we can put in, demographics or factors, absentee owner, 20 years, a certain area, and we're just calling them up and we're saying, hey, for the right price and the right terms, would you have any interest in selling? And maybe some more stuff. And a lot of times we can initiate a conversation. Maybe the conversation goes, no, and they hang up, but that's fine
Right.
because I feel like you're that much closer to a yes. And I
Right.
think it's not for everybody. My wife says it's not for everybody, but I enjoy it. It's
Right.
my favorite thing to do in the real estate hustle is cold call because I know who I'm calling. Like I'm not smart enough to understand SEO and those things. Like I want immediate gratification. I want to call the guy whose ugly house I just drove past and I want to see what's up.
Right.
And those calls all kind of start with, how can I help? What can I do to help? What information can I give? And I think that when you cold call someone, you've got to convey that quick. I get cold calls on all my properties all the time, and I listen to them. I listen way too long, and then people are always saying, "Hey, this is John Smith, and I'm working with a local investor group," and I never use the word investor. It's how can I help? And I
Right.
operate as if I can do good and I can help. It sounds cheesy, but hopefully the money will follow.
Right.
And that's kind of the MO. And so we have befriended a bunch of the code enforcement guys in different cities and they refer us, and we're constantly buying houses that caught on fire, hoarder houses, all these types. So we have kind of two arms of our brokerage where we'll go and list your house traditionally on the retail market, and if you want price, terms, convenience, you want to press the big red easy button, we'll buy your home. But we're very careful because we're realtors and we have to. I always try to push people, take your house to the market, regardless of how bad it is, clean it out, do whatever you can, get it on the market, listed as is, because your pool of buyers is going to be so much larger.
Right.
And as long as you've got somebody who's a good agent who can sift through these people, you'll do fine. But there's people who don't want that, where the house has personal belongings, they inherited the house. And so that's when we say, okay, well, we could list your house at this, and then we would buy it for this. And we try to explain, hey, you're not going to have commissions. We're going to have to take care of all this stuff. And there's an element of risk that we're
Right.
taking on. And so that's why we're giving you a little bit of a lower offer, because I don't want to be going around and having people think that I'm an equity stripper or something like that. And so I think the flipping and the stigma of buy your house for cash is kind of a negative deal.
Yeah. Well, and you got the ugly houses. We buy ugly houses, right?
Yeah,
That in itself is
right.
a negative connotation, but
Yeah.
people sell them all the time. But I mean, the way, I mean, you just put on like the last few minutes have been like a master class on like how to actually do
I don't know
to
about
do
that.
to be no.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, you're right. There right now. I mean, we do all these trainings on social media, like
Yeah.
reels. Got to do
Yeah.
this a day and this a day, and people are really good at it, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people are not, and there's a
I
lot of people uncomfortable to do it,
yeah.
right? And it takes specifically it feels like my age or even
Yeah.
older, it's harder to
It
get
is.
that down,
It's
right?
yeah.
But just the cold calling and how that is the biggest thing, right? Because
Yeah.
that's a lot of people hate to cold call, right?
Yeah. And
I mean, I personally I get so busy and I try doing it, and then I'm getting like I just have to tick my blocks. I can't no turn my emails off, turn everything
yeah.
else if
Yeah.
I'm going
I
to do
agree.
it, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise
You're
I just
looking for distractions before you start,
correct.
and I don't know why I gravitate to the cold call. I like talking to people. Even if they say, hey, we're not interested, I try to flip it on them. All right, well, awesome. I see you own, these 7 properties that are all in Crystal here. We're constantly calling people similar to you, and a lot of times we're coming across opportunities. Do you have any interest if we were to bring you an opportunity to buy? Well,
Right.
and so you've got to be able to switch it, because you call them up, you say, hey, are you interested in selling? And they say no. You've got to do something else. You've got to
Right.
build rapport. And what we also like to do is, I mean, I'm not just calling people blind.
Sure.
I'm not skilled enough where I have a dialer yet. I'm trying to make 25, 30 calls a day or
Right.
something to that
Right.
extent. And
Right.
I'm not doing it every day, but I'm trying to target. And so I call these people up, and I know when they bought the house. I know approximately how much equity. I know stuff about the house, so that I'm not just like a robocaller. And the other thing that we've had luck on is we call, we put them in our CRM. Hey, we talked to John Smith this time. They're not interested. And then I like to send them a thank you card,
Right.
just a handwritten thank you card. Hey, thanks. It's cheesy, but
Hey,
it's
hey,
worked.
hey,
We've got
that's
lots of deals.
the time, that handwritten note, letter, card is I mean, that really is proven over time that
Yeah.
works beyond, you
Yeah.
know. I think we've talked about before. There's a guy that lived on Upper Twin,
Yeah.
right? So for 2 years prior to him buying his house, he was sending out
Yeah.
letters like 3 times a
Yeah.
year.
He'd
We want to
send
buy
them
your
with,
house. We want to
yeah.
buy your house. Well, he finally got someone to sell.
Yeah.
So it worked, right?
Yeah, he would send a letter. I know him, Alex, and he
Yeah.
would send a letter with his 2 little cute dogs. I would call him every time on his letter,
All
and
right.
what do you think? And I'll sell anything. I don't care. I'll sell my personal house. I don't know how excited my wife would
What?
be, but I'm a real estate guy,
Sure.
and
Sure.
I think that the with the way the market is, people have plenty of success doing social media. I try to do it. We have someone who helps us. We for sure could do better. We could post more. But for me, it's instant gratification. I want to figure out who I'm going to target, and then I'm going to call them and
Right.
see what we can do. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we just bought a duplex where we called up the guy, and he just inherited it from his grandpa, and his grandpa had let this guy live on one side for 30 years rent free, and he stipulated something to the grand or the nephew, that he had to live there until he either died or went to the home. So he was going to the home. The tenant on the other side like pretended to flood the basement, and so we called this guy up. He answered and said, yeah, I think God told me to call you. And we ended up buying his property. Another one that we just did is we talked to the mail person. It's kind of weird. My wife thinks I'm nuts with all this crazy stuff, but I have all these buildings, and so I know all these mailmen, and I
Right.
walk up to the carriers and I say, hey, can you tell me where you have these vacant stickers? Can you give me any addresses? And a lot of times they're looking at me like, you are a weirdo. And I kind of explain, hey, we can help these people. A
Right.
lot of times you're the first person to notice before the city and things
Sure.
like that. And so a mailman gave us one in Brooklyn Park, and we called, and they had an agent who I knew, and the seller's daughter was an agent, and they still wanted to sell it direct. We bought it, we cleaned it up, and now we're, back on the market, under contract, sold soon. So I think you've got to figure out how to go find the deals, especially in an environment like this,
Right.
where now the audience is smaller, there's less people, doing transactions. How do you find them, And I look for dumpsters, I look for overgrown weeds, all these signs,
Right.
estate sales. I go to any of them that I, see any for sale by owner sign, stop, and there's a lot of signs. And then you can buy software that's cheap, and you can put in all these demographics and call. And I was my grandfather used to be a real estate broker. This is kind of a long-winded story. My dad was a real estate broker. My uncle's a real estate broker. Both my brother-in-laws.
It's
So I've
not
got
in
a,
your blood at all.
yeah. And so my dad was not a very good real estate broker, and my grandpa and my uncle, and they all worked in the same office. And my dad used to work next to my grandpa, and I when I see my dad, I tend to talk too much about business, and I was saying, hey, I talked to a lot of these people. Some people may be on my team, and they need to cold call more. These people just need to call. And he's like, oh my gosh. He says, not everyone's cut out to call. Like, they're just so fearful. And he says, I was fearful to call. And he says, your grandpa once said to me when I was in the office, just pick up the phone, just call somebody, just call. And it's
5 4 3 2 1 call.
yeah,
That's
it's
simple as that.
just call. I was listening to a podcast about an agent in New York City who's been doing it forever, and he said the phone will solve any production issues.
Right.
So it's
100%. When you get, I just this year, for mortgage real estate, and you just go back to the basics. How did I even get my start? Right.
yeah,
I literally, I had 1,000 people to call, and the only real estate agent I knew, Brian Olson,
sure,
no relation, right? But we
yeah,
we were friends through friends, right? We went to a couple of Vikings games together,
yeah,
and I got my license, and I called him, and I said, "Hey, man, I got my license." He's like, "Oh, dude, like." He said, I got my guy. I've had plenty of friends that become, mortgage
yeah,
guys. And he's like, it is what it is. I said, well, listen, I got a list of people that if I get somebody pre-approved, I don't know who I'm going to give it to. So is it okay if I give one to you? He's like, well, sure. So like the next day I had for somebody pre-approved to get,
that's
and
awesome.
he's like, dude, my guy hasn't given me one ever.
Yeah,
Ever. He does a good job, but he's never given me somebody.
yeah,
So we did 30 transactions that year,
wow, that's amazing.
together, right? So I gave him some, he gave me some, and so forth. And it was and then so like my story has become like I really did well. I was calling all these people, calling leads, and that was before Zillow became so expensive.
Sure,
When leads were like $7 a lead,
yeah,
and it was, and maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was like $30 by the time that happened. Now it's like $300 or $400,
yeah.
depending on what it is.
Zillow's expensive.
Oh, yeah.
We
So
did it for
anyway,
many years.
and then all of a sudden I had my business and I had more agents and I was calling agents, and then now I'm getting more business this way. And then it was referrals, my past clients. So I wasn't calling new clients. I
Yeah,
wasn't picking up the phone anymore, right? Well, go through the last 18 months, what do you have to do? You
yeah, I
have to
agree.
go back to that basics. And you're right. I mean, this thing is going to make you money if you
Yeah.
just use it,
I
right?
I agree,
It
but it's intimidating. We were at a church function and we were sitting with some different parents and they were talking to me about what I do. And this one woman said she's terrified of calling anyone that she doesn't have like a preset schedule of who to call. They're expecting there's a topic, like the thought of calling someone up and I tell my wife it may be no now, but it's not no forever.
right.
Like
Hey,
perfect. My wife's like, you're a creep. You've got to stop. I mean, I wouldn't say harassing. We're trying to help.
right.
We're going past, but we've had plenty of people say stop. Don't. I mean, I've got a CRM and a whiteboard in the basement with all these different vacants that I've been chasing for
Sure.
some years, and
Right.
we just had one where this vacant home lady owns it. Used to be her mom's, and she still has it set up as though it's her mom's, and she goes back there and sits and kind of reminisces, and she has the financial capability of not having to sell it, and her husband wants her to sell it. And my social media lady lives next door, and she put me onto it a couple years ago, and so I started putting stuff on the door, putting stuff in the mailbox, texting her, sending her letters. She just texted me, stop, I'm going to call the police. And so I ceased, and
Right.
then like a year and a half later she sends me a text, hey, do you have time to talk? And I immediately had her saved in my phone, called her up, and she says, yeah, you know um she says, I get calls every single day. I get text, and she said, when you talked to me, you were the only person who didn't discuss price or terms. You wanted to meet me, and when I told you to stop, you sent me, a sympathy card. And I said, yeah, it might have been a little over the edge. And I sent her a gift card to our local bakery down there, and she said, I thought that was pretty good. And so
Well,
anyways, I ended up getting a meeting with her. She came to the office. We went to the house. It was like 2 hours. Didn't end up doing anything, but we're still, and it's
Well, you just turned in someone he was going to call the cops on you to a now
Yeah,
a potential,
Larry.
I mean, relationship. Again,
Yeah,
you can push those boundaries as long as you know how to bounce back from them, right?
yeah,
One of the guys on
absolutely.
my team, he can get away with saying almost anything,
Yeah.
and he always he does joke. He's like, yeah, I can say that, you can't, right?
Yeah, I feel like you
Because
you can't be too serious. So if like, if you're going in and hey, I'm Mike, I've flipped hundreds of homes, I own all these commercial buildings, I'm all this great. They don't give a shit.
right,
That's not the approach. The approach is, hey, how can I help? Can I look around? Do you want me to take off my shoes? And it's important when you're in these situations for the first meeting, like don't like follow someone into the bathroom, little body language, little things that people pick up on, and you might not. You're doing so many deals, you're
right,
you're so busy, we just got a listing and they had interviewed the guy is a builder. He has a broker's license. He has built hundreds and hundreds of homes. He owns, I don't know, 1,000 doors. He's far more successful than I will ever be, and he called us up and he wanted us to sell his mom's house. And so we interviewed, we went over there, and when we showed up, he had our agent roster of all the deals that we had done in the last 2 years. He said, hey, I want to compare this with your list and your sales price. And he was very diligent. He was super detailed. And we actually had to meet him twice. We've now met him like 3 times. And it was a process. He wanted to do well for his family, and there were 5 siblings involved, and some of them were, I don't know what the word is, they weren't playing by the rules. And so he thought, I cannot represent, I need to hire some third party person to help me with this so that my family doesn't say I sold it too cheap or
right,
things like
right.
that. And so we ended up getting the listing and we ended up talking to him, and I asked him some of the other agents who he interviewed, and he interviewed some agents who had sold in the area and some bigger name agents. And a couple of them he called, they wouldn't call back. He called two. One guy I'm sure a lot of people would know. And then he had another guy come over and he was not even in the house. And the agent started talking price of what he could list the house for.
Right.
And it was so off-putting to this seller, maybe because he was so advanced and he knew so much, and he barely let him upstairs and wasn't going to hire him. I mean,
Right.
he had just sold something right down the road too, and so he knew that he knew what he was doing. But it was, there,
Right.
I think like price is always one of the last things, whether you're going to a listing appointment or trying to buy someone's home.
Right.
It's important, obviously. It's why we're all here. But you start throwing price and terms and negotiations too early, it gets weird.
Sure, sure. And that's why you've done as well. I mean, just having this conversation, today I've gotten to learn a little bit, so much more about your business and your
Sure.
style, right?
Yeah.
Because so many times we talk on the phone, about a client or a
Yeah.
deal or whatever else, but understanding like how you go about your business, and like, for all the real estate and mortgage people that are going to watch this or listen to this, I mean, this has been a fantastic podcast
Well, thanks. That's the
interview,
first one I've ever done.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
the information you put out there, and again, bringing people back to basics of just using their phone, and
Yeah.
just I've always been in my sales career, whether it was selling cars to selling the interest rates on cars to now homes, right?
Yeah.
Doing and financing homes, it's always been, and my number one thing is uh, being empathetic, right?
Yeah.
To their needs
For
and
sure.
understanding what they want, and not just saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it. In some
Yeah.
places I can get away with that, but my number one thing has always been, and that's where most people come back to me or refer people, is
Yeah.
because, hey, he really knew, what he was not just talking about, but like how to,
Yeah.
navigate this process of whether it's a first time home
Yeah.
buyer or whether it's third, fourth, fifth, whatever it was, right? So, I'm in this one coaching class right now, and it's, what are your number, 3 qualities, you know, and you really have to you have to think about it, right? And then what are your company's three qualities? What are the best three qualities, right?
Those are tough questions.
Right. So you have to really, you know, think about that. But that's what, and then you just, then you identify, when you identify those, and then you make that part of your process. And, you know, naturally, I like the top three. One of them is empathy, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, buying a home is super emotional for
Oh
people
my
who just buy it,
goodness.
right?
Oh
So
man.
selling a home that they've been in it for 30, 40
Yeah.
years, right? And downsizing, and like they love their home or whatever else,
Yeah.
you know, or they're, you know, going from, you know, a 2,000 square foot home to a 5,000 square foot home, the excitement in that, right?
Yeah.
So all
And
those
maybe
are
it's not even excitement.
right,
I mean, I
right,
just in this last year, I feel like I've changed how I talk to sellers and buyers so much because I recently moved and I was lucky enough to be able to buy the home and I didn't have to close on the same day or any of these
right,
stresses that a lot of my buyers and sellers have to go through, and it was all lined up and everything was great. And
right,
and I was just panicked for like 3 weeks. I went to the doctor. I was feeling all these weird pains, and
right,
they had said, hey, you've got anxiety. And
right,
doctor asked me, what are you anxious about? Is it money? Is it? And I said, no, no, no. And I couldn't figure it out. And finally it started to taper. But I mean, it was a month where I was a wreck. And so now
and you've
I'm,
done how many home
yeah,
purchases? A couple
I've,
hundred.
yeah, I've sold hundreds of homes that I've owned.
Right, right,
And so I'm way more cognizant now and way more empathetic and trying to be, because it's crazy. They say that, I don't know what number top 5 stressful things is, divorce, death, moving, things like that.
right.
So it's
Yeah, it's just, you know, being able to pick up on that, because coming from the auto business, I can, you know, I've seen all kinds of
yeah,
salespeople, right?
sure.
And I was able to move up in management simply because I was teaching other people how
Yeah,
to be better and not
yeah,
just be, because so many people would get right at the price. There were some certain times that I remember one of the first times, I think it was my first year selling cars. And, you know, I'm the youngest, I'm in college yet. And I sent somebody on a test drive. This is at St. Cloud Toyota Subaru. And they come back, and there was nobody on the show floor. It was just kind of quiet, and just, you know, there three guys sitting at their desks. And I opened the door and I just said, should we write it up? And the people just laughed and said, well, let's talk some numbers, right? So I was able to get away with that. We
yeah,
sat down, and then afterwards, you know, the three guys were like, how, you know, they were like, how the hell did you do that? I said, well,
yeah,
because I've been talking to them
yeah.
prior to this, right? Because they knew my personality, and I was able to get away with it. But
Yeah, and I agree. I guess that goes into, you can't take yourself too seriously.
right,
You've got to know your audience. If you've got someone who's excitable, you're gonna, kind of pace yourself with them. If you got someone who's slower, a lot of times people are slower. I've bought many buildings from older gentlemen who talk slow, move slow, and
right,
you got to try to dial it back and match their speed and
right.
and kind of pick up on those things. And
Absolutely.
I think that that's the key. And, the other thing that we've found out is, there's plenty of people who are going to get you out for a listing appointment, or, maybe Zillow. Zillow's the worst. We did Zillow for years. We did great. It was great return, but it was like, now the phone rings on Sunday. You better figure out how to get out there and show them this house.
Right,
And then somehow explain to them that you're not the listing agent, but you
right,
can help them because they're tricked almost in thinking that you're the listing agent. So it's this whole game, and we ran it and we had great return on investment, but I finally gave it up because it was too much now. And I think
right,
that, I got a little bit diverted, but we've had Zillow people where I went out and I was too nice and naive and didn't have them sign a buyer's representation contract right away and sold them some houses, found they bought with somebody else, sent them a
right,
text, hey, is there anything I can do? And rather than kind of writing them off, sent them a thank you, a congratulations. And you never know, because like I've got quite a few clients who've come back after they haven't worked with me on another deal. Hey, I worked with this guy and it didn't go so well.
right,
And it's, you've always got to be kind and always got to try to help. I mean,
right,
this Zillow guy who didn't pan out. He bought a house, sold a house, and his girlfriend bought a house, and he was telling me how I was going to do that all. And then I was doing an apartment. I was selling an apartment deal, and he happened to be the lender. And so I called him up and I was like, Paul, and I was never rude and I
Right.
was always nice. And so now Paul has given me a handful of different clients who have bought large apartment
Sure.
buildings and commercial buildings because he does that financing. So
That's awesome. That just goes to say what just being kind does,
yeah,
right? Really.
yeah,
Well, Mike, we got to wrap it up here today.
perfect.
So everybody, please like and subscribe. Mike's information will be on the information that you'll see out there on our from our podcast webpage to YouTube. But Mike, I appreciate you coming on.
Awesome.
Your expertise has been superior today, so that's been awesome. But
Well, thank you guys for having me.
yeah,
Thank you.
much appreciated.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.